Vertex, an American-based drug company, makes record profits as customers can't afford their medication. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Drug companies are our topic for discussion again today. Vertex, an American-based pharmaceutical company, is coming under fire for making a cystic fibrosis (CF) treatment unaffordable while raking in record profits. According to The Guardian, Vertex is refusing to drop its price for the life-changing CF drug called Orkambi. Maybe they can't lower the prices because they aren't making enough money, right? Well, if you made that assumption, you are dead wrong. They are set to make $21 billion in profits from Orkambi and their related drug, and that's in American dollars. For context, before we move on, cysticfibrosis.ca reports that the disease is the most common fatal genetic disease affecting Canadian children and young adults. There is no cure, but the drug created by Vertex provides a form of treatment to make living with the disease more bearable. CF, short form for cystic fibrosis, largely targets lungs and the digestive system. As the infection spreads, it can lead to the destruction and loss of function in the lungs. That eventually then leads to death in most cases. It is estimated that 1 in every 3,600 people born in Canada have CF. When you extrapolate those numbers out, there's a fair bit of the population with this disorder, and to the eyes of companies like Vertex, it is money waiting to be made. CF is a genetic disease that occurs when someone inherits 2 defective copies of a specific gene from their parents. In other words, this is not something that someone can take responsibility for getting. It occurs beyond their immediate control. It's a terrible disease that presents a lifelong challenge. Normal bodily functions like breathing become a struggle. Vertex, the company, comes along with a treatment that enables people with CF to live better. In a nutshell, Orkambi helps restore a balance of salt and water in their lungs, and that helps treat the disease. Although it's not a cure per se, it definitely makes life easier. Vertex wants to charge over 166,000 Canadian dollars per patient per year for access to this drug. You can clearly tell that that is not anywhere near fair market value when you look at the bottom line. They dictate the market value completely, and they're able to inflate their profits as much as they want. The pharmaceutical industry is essentially the deadly sin of greed manifested in today's world. The problem with drugs, and why I don't think they can be left free in the market, is the way demand works with them. You've essentially no cap when it comes to treating a potentially fatal disease. That's a cap in terms of how much you're willing to spend. That is especially true when it's for your loved ones. You're actually more likely to take a hit to yourself before letting that happen to your child, for example. This creates a scenario where companies can charge you over $150,000 per year because you don't really have any other options. There are no other treatments, and you can't simply not buy the medicine, or you face the risk of death. At the very least, you face the risk of a severely more challenging lifestyle. What's to stop the company from charging maybe $200,000, or $500,000, or $1 million? The real answer here is your total wealth. They know you'll do anything to get hold of the medication, but at the same time, consumers have a finite supply of assets. They can't charge $1 million, or else maybe 10 people can afford it. They're trying to place the price as high as possible while still allowing people to purchase them. This inflates the bottom line tremendously, resulting in things like the reported $21 billion in profit for this company. If you look at a different company, like Apple for example, they cannot realistically inflate the price of an iPhone to $100,000, or very few people will buy it. It's not a necessity, and we have other choices available to us. Drugs don't play by these same rules, so I don't see why they should reap the benefits of a free market without any of the detriments. The detriments are there to keep the balance between consumers and corporations, but in this case, companies have all the power in the equation. They've essentially become a monopoly, these drug companies. And if they're not a monopoly, they're an oligopoly where they're all working together to fix prices. Very similar to gas stations. This is not good for the individual, the consumer, who will go bankrupt looking for treatment, or the country, who will have a series of poor, sick people to deal with. And in the case of a country like Canada, who covers some types of drugs, then the country will go bankrupt That's your tax dollars. It's appalling that the government has not done anything to regulate these enterprises yet. I'm realistic as well though, and I realize that there are some limits. The answer isn't to bog pharmaceuticals into the ground. One of the reasons why we even have these drugs is the profit motivation. Companies invest into R&D to make new drugs so they can make money. My point though is that although profits are needed and well, there comes a point when the company is making far too much, and in this case, a vital drug provider, they should not be making anywhere near $21 billion in profit. That obviously indicates their margins are out of whack and consumers are getting screwed. This is quite literally a life or death balance, and they're trying to maximize capital. Why can't the companies be satisfied with, say, a $1 billion profit? A $2 billion profit, even $5 or $10 billion would be massive improvements. It's hard to even fathom how much money $1 billion is, and they're pulling in 21 times that like it's nothing. That's still massive wealth even if you break it down to 1, 2, or 5 billion, and it allows room for the prices to fall to more affordable levels. It benefits society, and the companies still make a pretty penny. Governments need to step in and regulate prices, or these drug companies will continue to spiral out of control. When I say regulation, there's a lot of ways to do that. One of the more common suggestions is the government can set a predetermined markup, a certain percentage that the companies can charge on top of their cost. The companies should be able to profit from their products, of course, but not astronomically where everyone suffers aside from the shareholders. If we don't do anything about this, the corporate greed will worsen and you'll see prices inflate across the board on a yearly basis. Hold on a second. That sounds awfully kind of like what's already happening. Vertex argues that they invested $11.8 billion into the research and development of this drug. That probably spans over multiple decades to reach amounts that high. Let's assume that their number and their projection is accurate. They didn't try to round it up a little bit. They're still set to make $20 billion in profit. They've done tremendously well for themselves, and they're making money hand over fist. That's $20 billion in profit. The revenue is closer to $30 billion. It's logical that the prices should drop, but Vertex refuses. They know they're sitting on a gold mine and are not ready to relinquish that even for the common good. The greatest tragedy of this is the people who died who could have been saved. Think about it. Humans have created a treatment for a genetic disease that nobody thought was curable. We live in the era of the greatest scientific innovation ever. Yet, corporations can withhold life-saving medication to reinforce an already massive bottom line. If Vertex was not making any profit, or even very little, it would be a different story. You could feel some sympathy for them for charging these high amounts, because they're a company and they're not making any money. But they are definitely in a position to help. Instead, they choose to maximize greed. They choose to make their profits $20 billion. It's truly a tragedy, and it comes at the cost of lives. Vertex put out a couple of quotes related to this issue, and I found them to be rather dishonest. The first one is, "We have been relentless in our pursuit of a cure for CF and invested significantly in this area when other companies would not because the risk was too high. Vertex scientists have worked for over 20 years to do what was once thought impossible." Now look, of course Vertex deserves recognition. They did a miraculous thing here. Nobody is saying to strip Vertex of all profits and remove any motivation to continue R&D. The problem that they are willingly dodging is the obscene profitability of treatment and their unwillingness to reduce prices. Make your profit. Make a couple $1 billion, but now, your projections? They're getting far too out of hand. Nobody needs that much money. $20 billion. You earn that at the peril of patients who cannot afford to spend over $150,000 on treatment, and those that do buy it end up bankrupting themselves. Vertex also says that the price of their medicine is based on the value they bring and the difference they make to people's lives, their families, and society, as well as their significant R&D cost. First of all, how does Vertex factor in the difference it makes to patients' lives into their prices? How do you quantify that? Does all life-saving drugs need to bankrupt the average family because it's so life-changing to the patients? Is that how we should measure cost? You undermine society with these practices, not save it. The power to truly benefit everyone and still make solid earnings is possible, but they've squandered that and crossed the border into gluttony. Today I shared with you the story of Vertex and their treatment for cystic fibrosis, but multiply this tale by all the drug companies in the world, by all the diseases with potential cures, and you start to realize it becomes a big problem because every company in this field is doing a similar strategy. They're trying to maximize profits at the expense of the consumer. Typically, that's not the worst thing in the world, but when it comes to drugs, pharmaceuticals, life versus death, it's not acceptable. The reality is these companies know exactly their position. They charge according to what patients can pay on average at the maximum. If the average household income is $60,000, they're going to make this drug priced at about 80 or 100K, so you can still afford it. Maybe you need to take a loan, maybe you sell your car, you refinance your house, but it's possible. They want you to sacrifice everything for their product. It's a terrible reality, and governments need to stand up to big pharma lobbyists. These are the real issues pressing nations, and they need more attention or things will just get worse. I would love to see government-owned facilities researching and producing drugs as an endgame. Medicine should not be completely left to the free market, or we get what we see here. Making it a social enterprise makes a lot of sense. The government has so much potential for answers, but not a peep has come out of them for decades. And I'm not saying strip profits away from R&D. Profits is a vital aspect that motivates people and companies to get something done. It motivates them to find cures that we enjoy. Let them have their profits, but be reasonable. These companies will still grind for $1 billion. Them making 20 doesn't make much sense. It doesn't further incentivize them. It just leads to further greed. That is not a vice that we can let take over the country and the markets. So, that's about it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and follow me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.